Hi, Caleb.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing well. What are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I am drinking a South Slope. So I got a little gin, a little Aperol. It's actually quite delightful. How about you?
I have a whiskey sour with egg white, which apparently is a Boston sour.
Boston.
A Boston sour.
That sounds wicked awesome.
It's really good, and I switched out lemon for lime, but it's great. I really like it, and a little bit of egg white in there, so it's quite nice.
Quite frothy.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of frothy.
Frothiness is in the air. We had a big announcement this week with Tesla, and it really was in the Gigafactory land in Nevada.
A Giga announcement. A Giga event for a Giga moment.
Yep. So basically, Tesla, made a big coming out party for the Gigafactory, sent out invites a few weeks back about the party, and are throwing sort of a rager of a party for owners.
Is this for press, or was this owners, or this was owners? Is that what you just said?
They had both. So they had press come out a day or so before, and they had all sorts of press from CNBC to Wired to Fortune to the auto blogs to some of the clean tech sites.
No one from the Tesla show was there, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
We were not invited this time. And they were given a tour. They had hard hats on. They had shiny vests. So they were going inside the factory. They were going on top of the factory. They were going into construction zones. And I think the primary directive from Tesla was to impress upon the press how large the Gigafactory is, how much progress has been made, how Tesla and Panasonic are working extremely well together, and that this is all in service of the Model 3, and that Tesla is fascinated with manufacturing and factory design. I think those are sort of the big messages from Tesla. For the press. One thing that I still don't quite understand is necessarily why they had the party and sort of unveiling this week or last week. It's not done. The Gigafactory is only 14% complete by Tesla's own admission, and so I'm not quite sure how many people throw an opening party when their restaurant or their home is only 14% done.
It's almost a quinceañera.
So I'm not. I don't know what I guess it must be that the pace of events they have coming wouldn't allow them to do it much later, and they want to get the message out that they're ready for Model 3 ahead of new earnings. I don't know exactly why they would do it right now, but I'm excited they did because we got some really good info. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on why they would announce it now instead of waiting till it's actually more complete? Like, why not do it when it was 7% done or 21% done? That's the one thing it was a little bit perplexing to me, is why do it now versus later?
Yeah, I have no idea. I know bankers and VCs take August off. So if they wanted to get Elon there, he probably had to, do it before August rolled around. And if you don't do it then if you get into September, then you're starting to rolling into Burning Man. And there are probably only so many Nevada desert events that you can have.
And iPhone season.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe that's it, or maybe these are terrible ideas. I really don't know.
I think it must be that that they think it's not as important of a story or won't get as much press as the Model 3 unveil. And so part 2, and so after part 2 has to be coming within the next 6 to 12 months. And so they don't really think they'll have any other event until then. So I think this has to fill in for that, because if you have this event after the Model 3 unveil part 2, it doesn't carry as much weight. I think that's the only reason, is like you have to do it before Model 3 since the Gigafactory is producing the cells for Model 3. And also that there's just too much going on production-wise to keep some of the things secret that they've unveiled, which we'll get to.
Yeah, maybe it was just this was the best time. Like if once they start breaking ground on the next part of what they're doing, then it would be difficult to bring people in. And maybe this was just a lull in the construction activity or something where it afforded them the ability to have a little party.
Yeah, I think so. I think it must just be that it was I think they probably had the most optimal time for when can we get people in that's safe and there's enough to look at. Because the interesting thing is that the Gigafactory has some construction, a lot of construction still happening, but some production actually happening on the power packs and power walls. And one of the neat things about the fact that people got to go and do tours, so they had on Friday, a lot of owners got to come and visit the Gigafactory, and they were having a party in the evening. But during the day, they actually gave tours, and people could record and do videos and photos. And so a few people did live streaming on Facebook video and Periscope and things like that. And so I watched one or two videos. One was an hour or so of a full tour, and another one was a 20-minute sort of excerpt, interesting bits of the tour. And there were a lot of parts of the factory for producing cells that are not running yet, especially in the Panasonic side. So if everyone remembers that the Gigafactory is both a factory that Tesla owns, but also Panasonic is sort of a lessor of space and in partnership with Tesla. And Panasonic is the battery company that they currently buy their cells from, but they have to ship them overseas, and Panasonic produces them in their own factories.
Panasonic's the one that's actually manufacturing the actual battery cells from the raw materials and then handing them over to Tesla, who then assembles them into packs. Is that right?
Exactly. And Tesla and Panasonic have been working together on improving the chemistry and the production process, and also inventing a new cell size. So remember when we spoke before that there was this idea of the 18650 cell, which corresponds to the actual physical dimensions of the cell. So think of like the AA battery. It's sort of 18 millimeters in diameter and 65 millimeters long. So it's about the size of a AA battery. That's what the commodity battery was in the day when Tesla got started, and was actually what was used in a bunch of laptops and sort of the number one cell size for lithium ion. And so they decided to, rig all those up in parallel and put them into packs, and that began the Roadster and Model S and Model X. But now that they get to create their own factory and make their own cells and have Panasonic working directly with them, they decided to think through, well, what would be the ideal battery cell? Because these were designed for laptops, which is not the same sort of usage patterns as vehicles. And so they've actually gone back and redesigned from scratch what those characteristics should be and what the ideal size would be for Tesla's own needs. And it's actually a much bigger cell that they ended up with, which is actually 21 millimeters in diameter. So 3 millimeters more in diameter, and it's 70 millimeters in height, so another 5 millimeters high. And when I saw those stats, I thought, oh, it's not that much bigger. But in the videos and the photos, you can tell it's quite a lot larger.
That must be somewhere between like a C battery and a D battery.
It's more, yeah. It's like it's like a blown up between an A and a C battery.
Oh, okay.
And what's interesting, I guess it ends up having about 45% more volume. And so you can understand that like there's so much more inside of it relative to the casing, and the casing is inert, it's like useless. And so they end up getting the benefit of being able to pack a lot more useful chemical inside of each pack with this new cell size. And so those are what's actually going to be inside the Model 3 first, and then will trickle into the Model S and Model X. So that is a new battery cell that we didn't fully know about. We knew rumors about, but is now sort of being described and shown off. And Panasonic will be making those for Tesla. So that's sort of one of the first big things that we sort of found out about through the press day, and also the videos from the people visiting, was seeing this new cell and seeing sort of the entire process of how Tesla is making them inside the Gigafactory.
So did any of the owners, since you mentioned that these are all or mostly Tesla owners who are at this event, did any of them post any information about how, like, did they bring the supercharging network around that facility to its knees or something? Because if you imagine, I have to imagine the supercharging network in rural Nevada is not incredibly huge. And if you have all of a sudden 1,000 Tesla owners trying to make their way to this factory, it seems like you could sort of tax the available capacity of that area.
Yeah, apparently they have superchargers at the Gigafactory for employees and also for visitors. So they had some there. Apparently they also bussed in a lot of people from the hotels in downtown Reno. It's about 30 minutes away from downtown Reno, the factory. But yeah, I think they definitely had a lot of people using the superchargers around there, and then in downtown Reno.
Yeah, because they had a video of all the cars, all these Teslas parked in the parking lot there at the factory.
Yeah, and the Atlantis Hotel in Reno is also now a supercharger, but I think you're right. Like, this is probably the most stressed out that supercharger world has ever been in Reno, and a lot of electricity being used to charge up hundreds of Model S's and Model X's. Certainly quite busy.
So the event that we watched, the live video event, was that at the end of the day after all the tours? Was it before everything kicked off? Like, when it had a vibe of the best way I can describe it is like the Model X event. It kind of felt like a frat party being held at a cult compound. Lots of hooting and hollering, lots of call and response. It was kind of unusual, especially when you watch it like a day or two afterwards and the moment has passed. Like, how do they actually, how does that happen?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't come off as well not being in the room, watching the live stream and then watching the recorded version. So that did happen on Friday night at around 9-ish p.m. Pacific time. So folks had gone through the tours, and they have parties. Tesla really loves having parties at their unveiling events, and they do them at night. Quite different from most tech companies and most corporate parties happening in the morning for important announcements. And so I think that the challenge here is that they live streamed it, but the live stream from Tesla didn't perform very well, which was unfortunate. But there were some people periscoping and Facebook Live posting and whatnot. And yeah, I think the crowd was very excited. These are the most avid Tesla fans. They were invited specially to come and visit. And I think somehow they just sort of, they feel like it's more like a concert or something than a press conference. And so there was a lot of people making calls out in any sort of quiet moment to, we love you, Elon, or like,
change the world.
Yeah.
Mars.
We believe.
Yes.
So, lots of people. And so he had to engage, and it gets awkward after a little bit. And
yeah,
it's not, not being there. And I think it's slightly disrespectful. I think they did a good job. Elon and JB Straubel, the CTO, were both on stage for about 30 minutes. And they had some prepared remarks. I mean, they had some slides to sort of talk about what they're doing with the Gigafactory, but obviously everyone had already sort of been through the tours, and these are diehard fans, so they know a lot of what's going on. So yeah, Tesla, I don't know. Tesla seems to still follow this format of party hard and then have an event with a live audience.
Yeah, if they're listening for advice, my takeaway would be it would be really great if they could have a shorter, information dense press event and then have the owner party afterwards, where it could be more of the Elon show where he's talking to the fans and stuff. But yeah, it's really challenging to watch that. And I remember the same thing from the Model X event. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't. Maybe it's just me. I don't know, but I'm not a fan.
You are a cranky old New Englander.
That is true. I will concede that.
And I think that is why they did the press event, though, the day before, so that the news about the Gigafactory could get out there in advance of the stream and the prepared remarks, because the press had already written their, air quotes, exclusives about their tour of the Gigafactory the day before. So all through Friday, all the releases were coming from all the major publications about their briefings on the Gigafactory.
And they had the photos of that little tiny dollhouse model factory.
Yeah, the really neat little dollhouse they'd made with little tiny robots.
Yeah, those were great.
So they had this neat model. There's videos of it on YouTube of what the whole Gigafactory looks like. So I just imagine, what if you're the intern or someone who's okay, you gotta make this dollhouse factory version of the whole factory.
Maybe that's from the architects, though. I mean, that kind of go from CAD to maybe a small physical model.
I think it was. Yeah, I think some of those robots were out of proportion, but it was neat to see. So what do we get out of the event and the actual visit of the folks visiting around the Gigafactory. Let's sort of go through. I know I have some things on my list of things that stuck out to me. I know you have some things. So let's just go down, talk about what stood out of sort of newsworthiness or interesting tidbits that sort of came out of this Tesla event.
Sounds good.
So I think the first one on my list that stood out was the Model Y was confirmed as the compact SUV again by Elon on stage, and that it's going to be the next vehicle. I think it was pretty well believed that it would be the next vehicle. I think a lot of people were holding out hope that the Model 3 would have a hatchback edition, maybe, hopefully. But I think those dreams should be dashed by the fact that the Model Y, which is going to be a compact SUV, is going to be the next vehicle that Tesla, it's the next most important vehicle that they're working on, and most likely will be the next unveiled. So that was sort of more confirmation that the Model Y will be next.
So the Model 3 is stuck with the micro trunk, and if you don't like it, you have to wait for the Model Y.
Yes.
Okay.
It seems that they've done some work on the trunk to expand the trunk to get more junk in the trunk, but it is not it is not going to be a hatchback style. So that was the first thing for me. What do you got?
I thought the emphasis on the factory itself was kind of interesting. They touched on a couple of points that I thought were a little bit I don't know, maybe overly emphasized. They're talking about how the whole factory was in CAD. And I think it was Elon who said that most factories are just like structures and random placement of equipment. And that struck me as being extremely false. That doesn't seem, I have to imagine that most factories, I don't believe that the iPhones are manufactured in just a sort of bag of bots sort of factory. I think companies that do manufacturing are extremely concerned with efficiencies, and that just kind of felt like a little bit of a straw man argument and seemed unnecessary.
Yeah, I that stood out to me. I thought the CAD drawings, looking at them, they did look really dense. There did not seem to be much floor space left over for humans to walk in between. But in the tour that I watched, there was definitely a lot of empty floor space still. So there's still a ton of work to be done on many parts of the factory to get a lot of the equipment in. But yeah, I mean, I've been in a couple factories, nothing of the sort of technology bend, more old-fashioned paper type factories and production stuff. And those I would say are a bit more haphazardly laid out. Where they are definitely machines that other companies have. They buy them, they put them in the factory floor, and they try and put them in an arrangement that makes sense. But I do think that this more high precision manufacturing, like you mentioned, of an iPhone or vehicles, clearly is more thought out than Elon maybe gave credit to. I mean, he sort of said it's sort of like catalog engineering, where you just sort of buy things out of a catalog and plop them in your factory.
Yeah, it felt a little weird. It felt like, that seems like table stakes for advanced manufacturing, and it seemed weird to focus on it. Like, you can talk about it, but it doesn't seem like a differentiating feature.
So they seem to be extremely focused on pushing the boundaries for how efficient the factory can be. And so the two options are, I guess, one, they are so unfamiliar with manufacturing as a team that they've sort of discovered this process of being efficient and thought how powerful that is. But the thing that doesn't ring true to me about that is they do have a lot of senior auto manufacturing folks on the team. And Elon is also talking about a 5x improvement over that. And he does seem to understand that in traditional manufacturing of automobiles, that the cars come off the line at a really slow rate. And you see this in a lot of behind the scenes, like how it's made videos of cars, that they're sort of moving through the factory at a very slow, like less than a meter per second kind of pace, like very slow. And that he wants to get that up really fast.
Wait, I'm sorry. Are you saying a meter per second is slow? That seems really fast.
No, less than that. They're like 0.2 meters per second or something.
All right.
Yeah, no. But his point was that iPhones come off the line extremely fast,
right?
And that why can't cars? And also that you don't that the way that you improve this is the same way that you would in silicon manufacturing, of making the circuit more dense and increasing the clock speed. And so he's trying to take those sort of lessons learned from silicon manufacturing into auto manufacturing. And it was part of the master plan part deux of the build the machine that makes the machine. So I think they're just really fascinated by this idea. And one of the things that he was talking about in one of the press conferences that I did think was pretty cool was that he was talking about it takes a ton of effort to improve a particular part on the car, and we can spend engineering resources to get a couple percentage points improvement over what's already out there. But if we take that same engineer and apply them to the problem of how do you build that inverter that, in his quoting him, it can deliver 10 times the efficiency improvement. And he cited one example where the engineers were able to reduce a production station's time from 200 seconds to a single second. So industry best was 200 seconds up until that point, and they got it down to a second. So just sort of that he and the team are really trying to figure out how to make things a lot faster inside the factory, and that if you can make them faster, you spend less time making them, and you can make a lot more of them with the same fixed cost. So I think that was the main reason there, and showing it in CAD is just sort of a cool slide.
Cool. What struck you?
One thing that was really interesting was that he was talking about how raw materials come in one side of the factory and packs and batteries come out the other, and they're going to build a train track to Fremont to get the packs over to the Fremont factory for putting into the vehicles. But that in the next Gigafactory 2 and beyond, he expects that they're going to collapse both of those factories into one. So the Gigafactories in the future will actually manufacture the cells, batteries, and the cars. So raw materials will come in one side and finished cars will come out the other. And I thought I was not expecting that. It makes sense in retrospect that they wouldn't build car factories and gigafactories in every place they want to manufacture cars, but that's going to be an even more gigafactory.
He mentioned specifically that he wants a gigafactory on every continent too.
Yeah, that's the other thing. And I don't know. There's I can think of one continent where it doesn't make sense.
I don't know. Penguins need their Teslas too.
Yeah. And he sort of laid out that Europe is most likely next, and then China, and then another factory in Asia, since the China factory will most likely have pretty strict joint partnership sort of work in it due to the way that China allows outside companies to come in. But that's going to be interesting as well. I mean, there's already the Gigafactory in Nevada is already labeled Gigafactory 1. So they're already anticipating more, and there's just more confirmation today, or I guess when the event happened, that there will be many more, and they will be car manufacturing as well. So that was kind of cool. Didn't know that before Friday.
Yeah. I thought the focus on recycling was pretty interesting too. I'm not sure if that was actually part of it or if that was part of the Q&A afterwards. But yeah, they were mentioning the other guy, the not Elon guy. Who was the not Elon guy?
JB Straubel, CTO.
JB. All right. Pass the peas. JB mentioned that all the materials stay in the pack.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's obvious when you actually say it, but I think it's kind of interesting that there are no emissions. It's not dropping any, or under normal circumstances, isn't dropping anything along the way. So if you recycle the pack when it comes back, all the stuff they put into it is going to be there. All the stuff that was in it when they shipped it out will be there when it comes back. He did not go into how much of that material can be reused in the next pack. So I think that's something I would like to know more of, like how much of it can be reused in new packs and how much of it is going to be disposed of. And does that mean that if a lot of it's going to be disposed, does that mean that the Gigafactory is going to be at some point a future Giga Superfund site with materials all sort of accumulating in the ground? That's, I think, kind of interesting. They also talked a lot about lithium, like the actual lithium going on, and how it's a very abundant resource on Earth. And but yet it's only 2% of the actual battery pack, which I thought was pretty interesting, although they didn't specify what axis that's on. Is that 2% of weight, volume, cost? It's 2% of some dimension, and they didn't tell us what the other 98% are.
Yeah, and I keyed in on that as well, and I thought that it was a great point, because there's been one of the things that the oil industry and some of the folks who are trying to go up against the battery manufacturing world is showing photos of really clean, cool-looking natural gas extraction in the forests, and then showing lithium mines as contrasting and trying to say, like, lithium mines are not green. Look at how beautiful our natural gas or fracking extraction is.
Clean coal.
Clean coal.
As our friend says, it's like coal, but with the word clean in front of it.
Yes, clean lithium. But basically that the idea that the lithium doesn't go anywhere, and that even when we've done extracting it, there's plenty of lithium on Earth and to get all the cars electrified, and that once you've gotten the fleet electrified once, you can perpetually recycle that lithium over and over, unlike natural gas and oil that is burned and then you have to go find more of it. So that was a really sort of refreshing point to make that I think some people forget. And also one of the other things, I think, to the point about how much gets reused, that the lithium and some of the other metals like cobalt, which are in the battery, the all of that can be reused. It just sort of moves from one side of the battery to the other, and then they need to put in fresh electrolytes and redo it. But that the whole the entire production process as well is sort of this closed loop thing where some of like the slurry stuff that they add this liquid, the solvent in it to make it liquid to move through the factory and go into this jelly roll, which is basically the anode tubes and then the cathode, that it basically is flattened and then they roll it up into that cell structure. That all gets pumped continuously like a chocolate fountain inside the factory, and so that doesn't even get sort of reused, similar to like the water in a car wash or whatever, where it sort of gets reused. And some car washes are better than others, but sort of a closed loop system. And that the Gigafactory, will be the ones doing the recycling. And the cool thing too is that they know what pack it was and they know how that car has been driven. So they understand sort of the characteristics of that battery a lot better than a traditional recycling plant would sort of just take random batteries and have to, use a generic process. They're going to be processing Tesla batteries. So that was kind of neat. Just sort of a reiteration that the whole process is trying to be sustainable. And also that the Gigafactory will be running on geothermal and also on solar energy. So it itself will be running purely on electricity of renewable source.
Yeah, the geothermal was new to me. I was a little unexpected when that popped out.
Yeah, I think they just had so much energy usage that they can't even get enough solar panels.
Didn't you mention it in the context of cooling too? Does that mean they're just like doing where you pipe the water or something down into the earth and it cools down and you bring it back up to cool things off?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the big one there. And then eventually I think they said that the building is really well insulated, but a lot of the walls are temporary because they're still expanding.
I thought the whole focus on it being like they went over and over again about how it's the largest building in the world by the footprint.
Yeah, footprint.
And I don't know. I thought that could use a little more explanation. I don't understand. Like, is that just because they can, or is there some sort of tangible benefit to it being that large? Like, is there a benefit beyond it being, 4 adjacent buildings that are joined together? Like, why does it have to all be in one building? And if it is one building, isn't it going to be subdivided and have firewalls and different stuff inside it? Like, it seemed like, I guess I was just wondering, is that something they're doing to be able to say they have the largest building, or is there a concrete, no pun intended, a concrete benefit to having all of that being in one building?
Yeah, I sort of have the sense that it's to show the sense of scale that Tesla's going after, that they are a tiny car manufacturer in the grand scheme of things today, and yet they are going to have a factory larger than any other footprint building, so clearly larger than any other car manufacturer in the world, and also larger than any other building that exists, and that's really second only to Boeing in volume. Sort of, I think, speaks to their aspirations, and that the Gigafactory will produce more battery cells than the entire world produced in output in 2014 when it's at full production. So I think it has to do with sort of their ambition of the same reason some people build really tall buildings or really fast roller coasters to say they have the biggest and fastest to show that they want to be the best.
So there's some sort of intangible publicity benefit, or
I think so. Yeah, because also they're building it in stages. They could have been separate buildings, and like the buildings are actually subdivided for seismic reasons anyways. Internally, they happen to have a contiguous roof, but structurally they're actually not all one big, giant slab floor or something. They are kind of co-joined little mini buildings. So it's interesting that it's really going to be considered one big building. But I think it's much more for the bragging rights of the bigness of it, and to prove that their ambition is quite large, beyond just roadsters. That I think a lot of people still think Tesla just wants to make cars for rich people, as much as they say they don't.
Well, until they actually. I mean, that's all they do right now. So I guess until they actually make more things, they're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. And I think this is, hey guys, like, we're really serious about this. Like,
this is happening, people.
We're building a lot of battery capacity here. There aren't that many rich people in the world who are going to buy that many cars. So
what else struck you about do you have any other interesting things?
Yes. So we talked about in the last episode who would share their car in a Tesla shared fleet. That doesn't seem to make much sense. And Elon probably heard that loud and clear as well, because he went extremely specific on the details of the user interaction model of a future Tesla car sharing app by saying, you'd be able to like go in and add your car to the fleet with one button, and say if you just want 5-star users to have access to it, or everyone, or just your family. And then when you want it back, you just press the button in the app and it'll come back to you. So pretty ballsy to go so in depth on how this feature is going to work. I'm curious if the UI designers and product designers of the app knew that. But I think regardless, it does signal a really good sign that the idea of being able to share it just for your family, which then probably means similar to the way that I share iTunes with some of my friends, that could be with friends. Now that is much more interesting. Being able to share a car with a few people or just your family, or...
Does that really sound interesting to you, though? I mean, like...
Yeah, that's much better.
How would you ever end up using that, though? That sounds like the kind of thing that sounds really cool.
No.
But then you realize, wait a minute, like, we all drive to work around the same time. This is not a useful feature.
No. So having that, even just for your spouse, right, where you go to work earlier, or they go to work earlier, and then the car is done, it drops them off at work, and then it comes back home and takes you to work.
Okay.
So you only need one car instead of two.
All right, that would be useful. So provided you don't have to show up at work at the same time.
Yeah, but even if you,
Well, I guess if you did, it could just drop one of you off and then the next one.
Sure, and then come pick you up. But basically that the sharing system will also work for, a small household, or like being able to say your kid can call the car in the afternoon to come pick him up from school and take him home, and then it will come back and pick you up from work. Like that seems great. Or take him to soccer practice and drop him back off.
Interesting.
So that seems great. And the idea, or go pick up your parents who need to go to a doctor's appointment and you can't drive them, or anything where it's sort of your family or friends need a ride somewhere, and you're fine with them taking your car when you're out of town. The other kind of neat idea I'd heard this week, which I thought was kind of neat about just the car sharing, is say you go on a trip across country and you're going to fly, but you could send your car in advance or to follow you, so you don't need to rent a car. I thought that was kind of neat. Because my grandparents used to drive down to Florida to their Florida house.
My parents do that, yeah.
Yeah, they would have preferred to fly. So they could have taken the car to the airport and then had the car go down, taken a taxi to their house, and then a few days later their car would show up for the summer, or the winter in this case.
That seems like it would be better to just pick up a new car when you get down there from the fleet. But okay.
Anyways,
tangent.
I was happy to hear that they are thinking about it more than just like, oh, we should have a sharing system.
Maybe. I don't know. It sounded a lot like Elon was just talking about random features he had thought of. He sounded like he had tripped a little bit into the bored Elon Musk mode from the...
The
Twitter. If
Twitter.
our listeners are familiar with the Twitter account of bored Elon Musk, where it's just this account that tweets out random crazy ideas, it started getting into that territory.
I don't know. I still think it is great. And I also think that being able to limit it to certain sort of caliber of people who have already proven themselves to not be drunk people in your car certain times of day. I'm still thinking through whether or not I would share my car. The question is whether or not the Model 3 in their first incarnation will even matter. Like, will it have enough autopilot sensors to deal with it? But regardless, I think it's interesting that they're revealing that information so early, because there's nothing to actually productize yet. So
yeah, it was oddly specific for the current point of its evolution.
Agreed. What else? What did you see?
He talked a little bit more about this idea of a bus, or whatever you would call the personal transport, and about how he's surprised at how many people you can get onto the Model X chassis, which I do think they're misusing the word chassis as far as I understand it, but that's irrelevant. The platform, I think, is kind of what they mean.
Yeah, the skateboard thing that you see in the stores, the Model X has one of those, and you can build a car or shape or bus around it, and that's the footprint. That's the car footprint.
Which is kind of interesting. I think we had touched on this a little bit in one of our autopilot episodes about how once you start taking the actual driving experience out of the equation, it no longer becomes a design consideration, and you can start making differently shaped vehicles. And you can imagine if you have a Model X and you don't have to have a big sloping hood and frunk and trunk. It could just be a giant box if it's just going at low speeds in an urban environment, and you could just have people sitting from stem to stern, I guess. Is that the right nautical term? Did I stepped out of my depth a little bit right there?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, we'll go with that. From bumper to bumper, basically just humans all piled in. So I just thought that was interesting. They didn't dwell on that too much, but I thought it was an interesting call out to this idea that once it's interesting because especially with Tesla, it's an interesting tension where, as the cars start driving themselves and become more of a commodity and a service, then this whole idea of a elite driving experience, as one becomes more important, the other one becomes less important. And I think that's kind of interesting. And it was an interesting, at least allusion to that.
Yeah. And also he had been tweeting about this a little bit before that, one of the car blogs, Jalopnik, was guessing that the minibus that Elon was talking about might be based on the Model X, and had some renderings of it. And then Elon responded saying, pretty good guesses by Jalopnik, ahead of the event. And then at the event, he was talking about it. And he had also mentioned that they were sort of inspired by the VW Customs buses. So, those buses don't really have much of a hood per se. They just sort of fall off straight, and then the back and the engine sort of is underneath the feet of the drivers, and they could fit up to 10 passengers. And the VW bus was a really, really popular vehicle when it was in production, and that they're sort of inspired by that. So I'm really curious if they sell a consumer version of this thing when they announce it, or if it's purely for the commercial market.
Will the tech companies in Silicon Valley have self-driving shuttles? Is that what you mean?
No. I mean, I expect that will happen. So I don't think many regular people buy the Ford Sprinters and things like that. They're sort of relegated to just limo companies and Super Shuttle and folks like that. Not many regular people buy that. They'll buy an SUV or a minivan. So I'm curious if they'll sell a consumer version in the stores that's the Tesla minibus or space bus or whatever they're going to call it to regular consumers, and have a slightly different version that's built. Will they have one that's built with a steering wheel essentially, or will they only wait till it's fully self-driving and you don't need any of that space in the front passenger compartment for controls? But yeah, I could imagine I think they'll probably be aiming for 10 people. And this is clearly part of that bus concept, the high density transport thing they were talking about in Master Plan Part 2, which sort of rules out my little pod-based system. It sounds like it's going to be a little bit more traditional sort of vans that are going to have 5 to 10 people in them. And
it could be. I think once you start getting into public transport, though, then you start getting into regulations and rules about handicap access too. And a lot of, when you're watching bus drivers, a lot of it is making the bus dip down, helping people get onto the bus who are in wheelchairs. And there's not everyone is able-bodied, so there's some considerations around that if it's just a self-driving vehicle going around, that there would have to be some sort of way to accommodate people who have sort of special needs in moving around.
Yeah, but certainly not every single one of them, especially if they're low density or low total passenger count. So they could have 10 out of 100 have the ability to take folks in wheelchairs, and you would press a different button if you need wheelchair access, similar if you need a taxi with wheelchair access, or you need a van with wheelchair access today. So I would expect they'll have retrofits for that, and they already said that they'll have ones that could deal with folks who are in wheelchairs. So I don't think all of them would necessarily be able to do it the same way the city buses can, because they're going to be more sort of point to point instead of a fixed loop. But I guess we'll see. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see as they start selling into public markets, how they run up against things like in the US, we have the ADA that kind of legislates what municipalities and stuff have to be able to accommodate. So there'll be some sort of governmental outreach, I guess, there.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I was curious about the consumer side of things, honestly, is because I know so many people who use the minibuses convert them into kind of baby RVs where they're slightly living in them and slightly driving them, and they don't want to have a full-size RV. They want to drive a vehicle that is much more easy to handle. And so if it's self-driving, this could be sort of the first step towards a baby RV from Tesla, that the consumer version might have one with only 2 passengers and then a bed and sofa.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the other things that I think a lot of people will be disappointed about who are ardent Tesla fans is that someone in the rowdy audience asked about the Roadster, I think.
Yeah.
Elon did not give a concrete answer. So he's willing to talk about a 5-star elimination system for this unannounced sharing system, but not willing to commit to doing another Roadster. He basically said he'd love to do another Roadster, but they need to focus on these other vehicles first, and that doing a Roadster is sort of like dessert. And so he did not commit to doing another Roadster, even though they previously had been talking about doing one. So I think they only sold 4,000 or so of the first Roadsters. So that's a really small production run vehicle in the context of everything else they're doing. I mean, even the semis would sell hundreds of thousands if they do a good job there. So
yeah, it's an interesting future glimpse, I guess, about what happens as they start moving away from luxury vehicles and start making it up in volume with Model 3s and more commercial-oriented vehicles, that maybe a boutique prestige model is no longer something that they do. But then again, who knows? I mean, General Motors has the fancy super Corvettes that they make limited runs of too. It becomes a sort of, at least for traditional auto manufacturers, there seems to be this idea of having a premium line for some sort of competitive advantage or prestige or whatever.
Yeah. I think in the arc of time, they'll do another one. I just think it's not the next 4 years. So it seems like they're going to have their hands full with Model 3, Model Y, at least until 2020. They probably won't even be done with the backlog until the end of 2019 for Model 3. And then they're going to have the Model Y, which will be very popular as well, assuming everything goes well. And then they've got the semi and the bus, and then maybe they got Roadster in 2022 or something. So I think it's just distance of time from now when people might want one, because that'll be 20 years almost.
I think the further you get away from now, the less likely there is to ever be another Roadster. I don't actually think there ever will be another one, because I think as you start getting that far out in time, I think the entire focus of Tesla as a company becomes autonomy and cars driving themselves around. And I think the idea of a Roadster, of a exhilarating vehicle to drive, is inversely proportional to its autonomy. The whole idea of a Roadster is that you want to be able to just whip around the roads yourself and have this whole I'm a F1 driver experience. And I think that is in direct opposition to cars that are self-driving. And I think by the time they get around to doing that, it's cars are going to be less about the sexiness and sportiness of the vehicle and more about other features like having the app. I mean, Elon kind of betrayed it in talking in explicit detail about this app that won't exist for 5 years about controlling your Tesla. And like you say, just blowing off this idea of another Roadster. He betrayed what he's thinking about.
Yeah, maybe the folks who want the Roadsters are going to have to go to these alternative electric car companies that are popping up that are going to follow a similar path that Tesla did of starting with a high-end vehicle to prove themselves and then moving more mass market, like a Faraday Future or someone like that. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly demand for one now. I mean, it'd be pretty amazing to have like a 2.5 or 2.3 second 0 to 60 supercar in a Tesla Roadster, but I certainly wouldn't be buying one. It would just sort of be fun to go try. The other thing I thought was interesting too, to the point about continuing the high-end cars, is that the bus is going to be based on the X chassis, which then means essentially they're going to keep making the Model X for quite a while. And so that the S and X probably aren't going to go away, that they'll just keep evolving them on the same platform. I thought that was sort of interesting that they're not going to like totally toss them away like early models of iPhone design or PC design or anything like that, but actually keep those as their position in the product category and product line, but keep evolving them over time, and that the chassis and everything are already being built on for the future. And the reason I find that so interesting is that it's been talked about that the Model X and Model S were not really designed to be built for high manufacturing throughput. But certainly the chassis design and chassis size platform, that there's nothing that special about that in particular. Those are just dimensions. So just kind of interesting that sort of dimension set is pretty well defined and set, and they're already building future cars on it. So they'll have like the S platform, which is sort of the S and X platform, and then the Model 3 platform. And then also in a tweet, he mentioned sort of a pickup truck platform. So the pickup truck might be on something totally different. And so they might just sort of have 3 platforms plus a semi eventually. So anyways, just sort of interesting how many different setups they're going to have and how many different sorts of vehicles and permutations they could build on it. I think they'll have pretty much everything covered, like they mentioned. The last thing, sort of to your point last time about terrestrial transport, there was a bit of a hint about a new type of transport from Tesla potentially. What was that?
Wait, what? I missed this?
Well, we talked about a lot of earthbound things, but he talked about a seabound thing.
About someone in the Q&A, someone asked him about he had talked about semis and cargo transport, and someone asked him about the cargo ships, and would Tesla have some sort of any plans for dealing with that, which is interesting because most of the pollution, I think, comes from these cargo ships that run through and burn like the lowest grade possible filthy diesel.
International waters, baby.
Yeah, in the lawless international waters. What did you think about that?
I thought it was another great Elon, like, if they don't do it, we'll do it. So he basically said, if no one else builds an electric ship, Tesla will eventually do it, which he said about a few other things in the past. If someone else doesn't do it, we'll eventually do it. I
think I mentioned last time that the cruise ship that I went on at the beginning of the summer is technically an electric ship. It has electric motors that actually spin the propellers, but then they have diesel generators that generate the power for the electric motor. So there's no battery. I mean, there might be some small battery backup, but it's essentially the electricity is being generated through the diesel fuel. I have no idea if how other cargo ships work.
It's basically the Chevy Volt of ships.
Yeah, really. So, I mean, if that's actually quite popular, then, maybe that there's something there, but I have no idea. I don't know.
That's okay. The one last thing I would point out was the pricing. So Tesla and Elon talked about the whole reason the Gigafactory exists is A, to produce enough battery cells to be in the cars because they were afraid there wouldn't be enough, and also to drive the price down. But the price down from where? So the current sort of best-in-breed Tesla battery pack pricing we know of is around $190 per kilowatt hour. And so they plan to get to $100 kilowatt hour by 2020. So almost 50% improvement by 2020. And that's sort of the magic number that pretty much all analysts agree is when electric vehicles cross this magical point of cost relative to internal combustion engine vehicles without any subsidy. So by 2020, if things go well for Tesla and their estimates, they will be at a point where they could produce cars at parity with with internal combustion engine cars, and clearly have a lot of other inherent advantages. So I just thought that was really great to finally get a number of sort of where they're targeting, because the battery packs are the most expensive single component of an electric car and of a Tesla. And so the biggest way they can make them more affordable of all the things they can do is to work on the battery pack. And that's clearly why they're spending so much time on the Gigafactory instead of like the Giga battery pack or the Giga motor system or the Giga interior design system or whatever to try and drive down the cost of their leather or something. It's all sort of in the battery pack, and then eventually in the general structure of the vehicle, sort of the second biggest component. So that's why they're spending so much time on the construction of the vehicle in the factories. But
it's interesting how much they focus on lithium-ion battery packs and the cost of that. And I mean, I guess you can't predict any sort of future paradigm shifts that might happen in technology, but the internal combustion engine has been it's been an evolving technology for like 100 years now, but lithium-ion batteries aren't all that new. There were, NiCad batteries before that and lead-acid batteries before that, and it's not as mature of a technology, and it's not entirely obvious to me, at least, that in 5 years, lithium-ion will still be the best possible technology. And they didn't talk about this at all, but it would be interesting to know like how adaptable the Gigafactory is. Like, are they making a huge bet on a technology that might not necessarily be the cutting edge technology in 5 years or 10 years?
They did say something about that in the tours, and maybe they just said it because they trained the tour guides from Tesla employees to say it. But they did say that as the other technologies evolve, they're building the factory to be modular so that if the chemistry needs to change or some component changes or they have a different chemistry mix,
you got to respect the chemistry.
Yeah, you'd be able to adjust it. And I think the other really important piece is that Elon and Tesla have not said anything about any other major breakthroughs happening in science that they believe they want to commercialize. And that process could easily take 5 or 10 years to commercialize some breakthrough. So
oh yeah, definitely.
They just haven't seen any breakthroughs yet that would lead them to worry about lithium-ion being the thing to keep betting on. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would love for some new battery technology that's more efficient and less cost. But at this point, they have to bet on the horse they know. But yeah, certainly as we talked about, one of the downsides of Ford was that the vertical integration really came to bite them in the butt when Chevy came along and started introducing a new car every year, and Ford really just sort of had the Model T and Model A and a few other models, and they couldn't keep up with the refresh cycle that Chevy was able to invent. So certainly different times, but the battery technology and the investment they're making. Luckily, the battery side is on Panasonic sort of books. So from Tesla's point of view, if they do need new batteries, they could potentially go to some other supplier. But I mean, they're going to be producing so many batteries, it would be quite difficult to produce enough fast enough where they could switch quickly. So
yeah, especially if they've got 6 gigafactories on 6 different continents.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a long time coming before some new battery comes through. So they need to get everything they can out of the lithium ion. But yeah, so that was the last thing I just wanted to point out is that that's a really large price reduction in 4 years from where we are today. So good sign for the type of range and overall price that you could expect in 4 years. So
cool.
I was glad the event happened. It was cool. They streamed it out and were very giving with letting people take photos and video. So even though we weren't there, it sort of felt like we were there.
It was a virtual experience.
It was. Cool. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Where can people share their thoughts with us and find out more?
Yeah, if you have any thoughts or if you were there, that would be excellent too. If you can give us a first-person account, you can reach us on our subreddit at r/The Tesla Show, or on Twitter at The Tesla Show, or on our beautiful website at theteslashow.com.
Yep, that's it. All right. See everyone next week, and talk to you later, Mike.
Talk to you later.
Bye.